All right. So here we are, LinkedIn Live. I liked it LinkedIn Live. We used to do Telegram. We used to do Telegram Live. We have a
Yeah,
pretty big community, about 800 developers in Telegram. But the video component is so much more fun. There's no video on Telegram Live. So I'm excited to dive in. You and I have known each other for a while, but for people who don't know you, Nishant Panchal, the founder and really founder, CTO of Noteworth. I'm excited to dive in today, man. It'll be a fun conversation. For people who don't know you, which would be a significant percentage of our listener base, which are mostly developer, technical people, and other founders based primarily. Most of our listener base, our network is down in South America, and in particular Argentina. So, with that being the backdrop, can you give me just a sense of your maybe background slightly prior to Noteworth, and then the kind of the origin of Noteworth and what it at least what it set out to do, and then we can get into where the business is today.
yeah, for sure. So at a super high level, um, you know, my background prior to Noteworth was I was actually in college, trying to really complete my graduate and undergraduate studies in computer engineering at Stevens. It's in the greater New York City area. And at that time, I was really looking to get into medical school. So I was doing a whole lot of shadowing of physicians, nurses, just going to practices and health systems and really just trying to absorb as much information as possible. Again, computer science was definitely a calling as well. That was a really growing area. Startup incubators weren't a big thing back then. So, I was always trying to figure out, from the entrepreneurial side, the entrepreneurial bug that everybody gets, hey, what is, how can I have a bigger impact? I mean, I know I want to potentially go to medical school, but I also dabbled in the world of research for a little bit where we were trying to build out how do you help low latency applications, things like live streaming, kind of like, what we'd be doing right now on physical devices that are restricted with hardware, smaller batteries, smaller network bandwidth and things like that. How do you help those devices, get network traffic faster, but doing that more at the network layer? And that research was interesting. We actually tried to sell that research and productize it a little bit. Found out the hard way that trying to sell something that is very, very technical without a lot of users on a platform makes it very challenging. That's why I really went towards my calling of, hey, I definitely want to do something more in healthcare, help patients in some way, help clinicians in some way. And I very quickly noticed that patients at the health systems and the doctor's offices that I was participating in and helping out in, patients were bringing in their medical records in on pieces of paper. People were faxing things around. Doctors were really charting most of the time when there should be more of an interaction going on. And, even if this patient had been visiting the doctor for a long, long time or the nurse for a long, long time, it was very hard to have just this continuous information of data on the patient to really deliver personalized care. So it always felt like, the patient left the health system or that acute setting, which caused them to visit the doctor. They would leave, come back after 3 months and things had gotten worse. And what, did we do about it to really help things out? Well, not much. We still rely on technology, that's like 20, 30 years old. And, none of the cool tech that, we're using in things like banking and social media areas and things like that. So, that was a big calling for at least looking at, hey, how can we make an impact in the healthcare space, for patients who have to manage their health, remotely. And again, this is mainly ambulatory patients. So patients facing suffering from diabetes or hypertension, and things like that. So we really wanted to make an impact in that area. And I think that's where my passion really took me. And that's kind of where Noteworth originated from was, hey, how do you help patients at home better manage their health? And how do you build something for doctors and nurses that they can do those things? Because today, they have an EMR, which, records all this information, and they have these few other tools, but it really wasn't making an impact, at least not outside the office setting.
Mm. And that's awesome. And what was the origin? Was it Justin's idea, and then he was playing around with it, and then came to you, or?
Absolutely. I mean, at the time, at Stevens, when you're finishing up your last year of college, you have to really do this graduate thesis where, you work on a project, a design project that you can really do anything, right? Build something that makes an impact. I mean, I went around to everybody at Stevens to look at what they're working on. Went person to person. I was a weirdo going and speaking to every single person. We're like, hey, what are you working on? It's just a mobile app. Not interesting. Oh, you're building something that's a robot. Okay, well, what's that going to do? Because I tried doing something very technical and it didn't get anywhere because we had no users. Justin had the most sound idea. The problem that he called out. My co-founder was, one of his friends who was managing type 1 diabetes had a problem with her continuous glucometer interfering with her cell phone. And it caused an issue where, she looked at him and was like, hey, you're an engineer, fix this. And kind of just handed him this device and things like that. And remember, a continuous glucometer is very important for a patient managing diabetes because it lets them know when to take their medications and things like that. So it's a very serious issue that, that something like this can have so many faults in it. So that was one of the initial areas we started in, which is, hey, how do we just help patients with diabetes and patients with devices, manage their conditions better? Again, some of these people are writing their readings down on pieces of paper. Some of them had faulty devices. So one of the first things Justin and I did was we literally took a bunch of glucose meters and just opened them up. Clearly avoiding warranties and things like that, but just open them up to be like, hey, is there something we could do? Like, could we put like a Arduino board on it and a Bluetooth module and pull that data out? And we actually made some progress there, but it was also encrypted and all this other information. So, we ran into a lot of challenges on trying to augment existing devices. And then, as we looked into it more, we also realized was, hey, these are also FDA cleared devices. You have to be careful with just, selling something that augments this information. And we realized that, we want to take a step back and really take a look at this more holistically than just, hey, this is just a device issue, for example.
And it seems like you kept a lot of that original DNA, which is really conceptually taking data from devices, whether you're literally hacking into them without the consent of the device manufacturer in the original case, but then integrating through the APIs and access points that are available through the hardware. And then the initial idea, has that changed significantly from where it was conceptually, which is, you tell me, but as I understand it, you're taking data from the hardware devices and using that to effectively use the data to try to make insightful interjection points. Like, hey, we know, because we can see the data, we know something about you that you don't know, and therefore we can help you.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've definitely stuck true to patient-generated health data, which is, hey, the patient only visits the doctor's office for like 5-10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, unless it's an emergency setting, right? And the rest of the time, people are managing their health outside of the office setting. So there's all this data being generated, a lot from devices as well. But how do you make sure that ends up in the health system in a powerful enough way, in a way that's not stressful for the patients? Again, remember, in 2015, like when we started this company, Fitbit had just come out. So, at that time, it was very much that Fitbit was going to change a lot of things. Now we have all this information just coming into the health system, and now we can make all these decisions based on all this information patients are giving us. But, one of the things we didn't realize was, getting this information all in one place and into the hands of the clinician is a pretty big challenge, because it's not just the blood glucose reading that's important, but it's also other readings, right? It's, hey, patients who have diabetes a lot of times also have other conditions they might be managing. Like, they might be managing their weight gain and trying to make sure they're staying under a certain weight. They're trying to make sure they're managing medications. They're trying to make sure, they're filling out surveys that help the clinicians better advise them on care that is more personalized and tailored to them. But yeah, we certainly did very much focus on at that time, how do you pull information from devices? So much so that I'm not going to name companies we did this with, but at the time, there were many wearable companies out there that allow that, you would have to go through this complex sign-up flow for. And remember, a lot of patients today that are managing these complex conditions are more the elder population. Expecting them to even go through a sign-up flow, yet alone, remember their email address is a challenge at times. So we built automation scripts to even help them sign up for these third-party products. We no longer have to do that because we have our own mobile app. But at the time when we were really just trying to figure out a proof of concept, I mean, it was just two people in a college dorm with no funding, right? At that time, we were just like, hey, how can we just quickly allow patients to collect information? How can we pull that information out without having all the stuff built out and just give that to the clinicians and be like, hey, what do you want to do with it? So yeah, it was pulling information from devices and building these automation scripts that just help people quickly get through sign-up flows. That really wouldn't be scalable, and I'm sure people wouldn't be happy about us doing that stuff at scale. But it helped with the proof of concept for sure.
Yeah. Sometimes you that makes sense where you do things at early on. I would say majority of the time there's things you do early on that make sense that don't make sense as you scale, but you need to do them early on to kind of get that flywheel going. Is the concept now significantly different than when you guys originally started? I mean, you referenced some other companies. You kind of allude to, as I understand it, there's this kind of boom in the healthcare hardware tracking kind of space. And then has that not come to fruition? Do you think that was a slight bubble in terms of what the promised land, so to speak, of the healthcare improvements we can make from hardware tracking? Has that not lived up to the fruition?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the thing that on the business side we always talk about is, it's really challenging because it's a $1 trillion industry, and even the HIMSS just took place, and there are lots of interesting things people are working on, and everybody's using a lot of words, and there's all this money being put into healthcare, and there are all these interesting and smart devices coming out. But there's still a lot of wastage, and a lot of simple things that you just might assume should happen still don't happen. Like, we all have iPhones today. We all are using some form of meditation app or some form of activity tracking. And we all have probably had worked with multiple different insurance companies, and our data lives in like 7-8 different places at the very least. I'm sure that's the average number for a person, right? How do you make sure all this ends up in a place that allows your care team to make sure they can, take the proper steps with the tools that are important for both their internal workflow and working with you to make sure you're managing your health in the most optimal way, is still a pretty big challenge. And that problem hasn't been fixed. So even though there's been significant headway made in, connected glucometers that are out there are tons of companies that are built tons of great devices that are great IoT devices, things with connected spirometers. With COVID coming up, measuring your SpO2 is very, very important. So there are companies that are building better SpO2 devices, and all those things are happening. But again, at the end of the day, how do you make sure all this data ends up in a place that fits your care team's workflow so that it's actionable? It just hasn't happened yet, and it's still a big challenge, both from a billing standpoint, for care teams and health systems to get reimbursed for, but also from a standpoint of just, care teams being able to use this information to then take action on it, right? You can't just give activity data and no other data to the health, to the care provider or to your care team, and then expect them to give the best decision, give you the best recommendation for what you should do next without having all the insights. And that's still a challenge, that we're generating all this data, but it's like in 17 different places. How do we make sure it's in like this one platform or in this one area so that we can then make sure, workflow can happen optimally from there? So that's still a big challenge. And I think that's a big area that Noteworth is focusing on today, which is we have, focused more so today on, how do you start with the care teams, which is how do you make sure Noteworth as a platform supports various different conditions? So this can range anything from, mental health to even just pure wellness. And how do you make sure you're powering that with patient-generated health data? This could come from devices. A lot of it does come from devices, but also from other things a patient does. For example, if an education article was sent to a patient, did the patient open it? Did the patient read it? I mean, these insights are very, very important to know whether, a patient is managing their health properly or has the understanding, because these are challenging conditions. And, most people don't have a doctorate degree in medicine or a nursing degree. So, you wouldn't know exactly how to manage your diabetes unless you're properly informed on how to do it. And you're also not, reading these white papers. So if something new comes out, how do you as a patient find out about it, and leverage that stuff, right? Like in today's day and age, at least the generation that's growing up, right? Like we are way more aware of our health, and at least trying to look for more and more things that allow us to better manage our health. So health systems also have to take this approach where they're adopting these tools that allow them then to have workflows both internally within their teams, like using chat, and then externally, like doing telemedicine calls. Like it's crazy. I mean, I spoke with a couple of CIOs where they were describing they've been trying to do telemedicine since the 90s. And, you know, that, and it's still something that's not fully adopted yet, right? Like it's still a challenge. And yes, it's picking up pace because of something like COVID, where remote care delivery is very, very important, but it's still something that's a challenge, and it's still taking some time to, you know, get growing. But I think we're getting there. And I think one of the things that Noteworth has done is we've put all of this into one, which is condition management, patient-generated health data, and then all the workflows for care teams and patients all in one platform. So now you have everything in one place. So, you know, as a patient, you could sign into Noteworth and, you know, do all the things your care team needs you to do to manage any complexity of condition you have outside of the health system. And then all that information ends up to your care team, and that, you know, they could have, they could essentially have interventions before something gets out of hand. So for example, let's say you took a blood glucose reading that ends up with your, you know, health, you know, that ends up in the hands of your care team. And they're like, I see, you know, you've been taking, you know, readings and I feel like they're a little high. Maybe I want to adjust your medications. They could tweak that medication, and then that information the patient gets right away as a notification. The patient immediately knows that they should be, you know, taking different medications. And then, you know, that interaction, that constant back and forth is happening. So it's not that, you know, the patient leaves the hospital and for 180 days, we don't hear back from them in any way. You're again, just able to have that constant check-in to just make sure, you know, the patient is heading in the right track.
Yeah, that really feels like the promise of the devices, is that they're, instead of having just the one touch point when the patient goes to the hospital, you have the data feed from them being in the home, which is, you know, super valuable, right? Because as I understand it, and as we were focused on in my last startup in healthcare, if you can prevent hospital readmissions, in particular to the ER, the emergency room, that is hugely valuable to a hospital. And so,
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way that you guys are structured and many other healthcare startups are structured is that you charge the hospital, or you charge the health insurance, the payer of the hospital bill. And if you can prevent people from going into the hospital by collecting data in the home, then you can charge the health insurance company or the hospital money. Is that conceptually how you guys structure the business model?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and philosophically, my co-founder and I had a lot of arguments on this stuff as well in the inception days, which is, you know, I was like, hey, you know, Justin, why don't we just go, you know, consumer first? You know, and it was a real philosophical question, because if we went consumer first, who was paying for this? Right. You know, shouldn't healthcare just be available for people? Like, you know, shouldn't it be the health system, again, just our system's responsibility to make sure people are staying healthy? So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to stay on the side of, hey, let's build something that helps care teams. I mean, because remember, doctors and nurses are going in this to help people. My fiance, she's an ICU nurse, and they do not do this, you know, to become millionaires. They certainly do this, you know, to help patients. And, you know, if we build technology and tools that is efficient with their time, I think there is a lot of room for improvement there still. And there's a lot of room for impact, because again, these folks are there and they go to med school and nursing school to really help patients, right? And again, if they're only armed with a fax machine, I mean, scheduling still happens on pieces of paper, like literally physical pieces of paper. Even today, health systems still do this, you know, their schedules on a piece of paper rather than even using something like Google Calendar. So you'd be surprised, you know, how far behind we are in just terms of optimizing things that just make things easier for care teams so that, you know, they can deliver care more efficiently to patients. I mean, I did want to touch a little bit more on the devices part of it again, because I do think there is a challenge there, right? I think there are a lot of interesting companies that are getting into like more next generation devices that aren't always like consumer facing, right? Like EKG monitors and things like that, you know, continuously transmit data. But I think we run into issues today with, I mean, you really have to be able to educate the patient on how to use these devices correctly. I mean, taking a blood pressure reading, even though, it sounds pretty easy, you put the device on, you just take a reading, it's so important that you're sitting up properly. There's no background noise like construction. Your elbows resting properly. You haven't done any significant activity. You're taking the reading on the same arm each time. And again, and again, that's just a blood pressure monitor. A blood glucose monitor is even more complicated. How do you make sure these people are being educated on how to use these devices properly? But then there's also a technical problem, which is, it would be amazing if these devices can just magically get this information out there to the health system. I mean, a lot of people live in, areas that don't have the best cellular connectivity. So, how do you get this information to the clinician in an area like that? Like, how do you build devices that are that resilient? How do you build devices that are using Bluetooth low energy rather than, Bluetooth 3? Because again, there's a significant user experience issue with Bluetooth 3 versus Bluetooth low energy, right? So, again, I know from a technical infrastructure standpoint, if those improvements are made, I think devices automatically get better because, again, as more magical as this stuff can seem, the better it's going to work, right, for the user. But I think we're still getting there on. I think there are still leaps and bounds we could get ahead on. Just these medical devices feeling more natural at home. Again, It's great that we could transmit this information over the air now. I just feel like there's still a huge user experience gap. This is why the Apple Watch is so successful, right? I think
why? What do they do? What does the Apple Watch do that other manufacturers can't do or don't do?
I think Apple, for good or bad, they've figured out a way. I wish they would be more open in their platform, but the data from your Apple Watch just syncs with HealthKit very, very easily, right? And remember, I think we need a way to get all this information again over that patients are collecting to the health systems. Everybody has a smartphone in their pockets today, whether it's Apple or Android, right? And that's fantastic. But for example, your Fitbit, right? You need the Fitbit app for that data to sync with Apple Health, right? Imagine a patient having, the patient population having many different devices like that. A company like us would have to go and integrate with all these device manufacturers. But if they all integrated with Apple Health, then, a user would just have to say, yes, integrate my data with Apple Health. I might be using these 7 other devices, but it makes its way to Apple Health. And then a company like us, that helps get this data over to your care team so that, they could have workflows with you and make changes when they need to. That data gets there very, very quickly. Apple Health has certainly made a lot of progress in integrating things like other EMR systems. So today you can go into Apple Health and connect all your different health systems, through like a click of a button. But it's not fully there. Like there's insurance company information that's missing. Like some of my insurance providers are missing. So, the day I can do it, which is I can go in and just click a few buttons. And yes, it might be 18 steps, but if it's 18 steps and doable, then we could write automation scripts, because then we go back to the good old days, what we were doing day one, which is write these scripts and just, automate it for people. But, again,
the bridge is, if the bridge is there, you can always improve it. I'm curious on the technical side. Can you give me an overview of, I'd consider our audience to be quite technical, or at least we can assume that. Can you give an overview of the technology that you're using? And then if there was any important choices you made on the technology side, what considerations went into those choices and what you ended up with?
Yeah, absolutely. The philosophy that I've followed is go with the boring technology. And I think it serves you well because it lets you iterate faster. Boring technology that's understood well really helps with fast iteration. When we launched our our proof of concept, we built it in Node and we were thinking about going more serverless and things like that. And it was great. For the proof of concept, it was fantastic. But very quickly, you hear back from customers and they're like, oh, I want this feature and that feature and this feature. And in healthcare, there's like table stake stuff, right? Which is like, you don't have the ability to, break things and fail fast Not in every occasion. Like there are certain areas where you can do that, maybe on staging or on dev. You don't want to be doing that on production. Otherwise, you're going to get very angry emails from patients and doctors. And trust me, you don't want to be on the other end of those, because all you could say is, I am so sorry. I'm going to go fix myself. But from a technology, but just following that philosophy, what we've built our technology on is, we went with AWS with our cloud backend. It was really beneficial because, again, meeting regulatory needs is super important. So just being able to have tools that are HIPAA compliant and just, again, just a few people in a room building this stuff. You don't want to be spending times configuring a server for like a couple of weeks and monitoring this to be HIPAA compliant and going with some service that doesn't offer that. So you want to make sure, you're using HIPAA compliant services. So AWS really helps with that, and it made it really, really easy for us. And our backend is built using Python and Django. Django has been around for years, and it's a very strict framework. Like even if you go through a Django tutorial, it will very much so, tell you exactly how your files should be structured, how your tests should be written. So, if you're onboarding new team members, it's not more so like, how did this engineer decide to do this? No, it's pretty strict. So, it might not have been modularized enough, but where the tests are. And if there are no tests, that there are no tests, right? And it's built in a way where it's very strict, and it helps with other engineers coming in and out of the project. And we essentially have built a monolith, which helps us think of our platform as this one platform, and our backend is just this one single API that's hosted on Amazon, that holds its data in RDS. And then for our front end, on the mobile side, we built our app on using Swift, and then on iOS, Kotlin on Android, and then React and Redux on the front end side for the clinician side of things. We had to go with some of these choices, at least on the iOS side. We didn't go with something fancy like React Native, because again, we have to work with many, many different SDKs that are written in various different languages. I mean, if we were just a quick like enrollment sign up thing, that would have been great. But remember, like I said, patients on our mobile app take everything from telemedicine appointments to manage their medications, to take blood pressure readings, to talk to connected devices, and each connected device might use BLE or Bluetooth 3 or have their code written in Java versus Kotlin, right? So, again, just being able to have that lower level access helps a lot, especially in the breadth of areas we're targeting. And again, I think React has become just more standard on the front end. We did, again, for our proof of concept, we didn't go with React. We, again, just built a regular website that would, there wasn't any automated refresh happening or anything like that. But, very quickly as you build out features, you're like, you should just go the single page application route, and just keep the experience just more fluid.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, sometimes when you go with, what do you call it, block and tackle or base, common, it's almost like what's the phrase, reduction to the means, where you end up using the technology that everyone else is using, because if you use something more advanced, then you pay a price somewhere along the lines. You can't integrate with something, or, there's a feature limitation somewhere along the line. So another heuristic for this idea is, you ever hear the phrase, you never get fired for choosing Intel? I think something like that. Which is like,
I think it's also very much so. It's like nobody ever got fired for hiring like one of the big four consulting firms.
Yeah, exactly.
If something's messing up, you just hire one of them, and no one can say that was the wrong decision.
Yeah, exactly, true. And so there's this like regression to the means, which I think is true in healthcare. On the technical side for a little bit longer, and then I want to ask you some thoughts on healthcare. But on the technical side, do you have unusual integrations, or where is the most difficult technical challenges found in the business? Is it with integrations to healthcare companies, or just building on your existing platform, or are there things that are uniquely challenging technically to?
I think this is a great question. We're always talking about this. Again, so the benefit of us picking the boring technology was that we were able to, since we needed to be feature heavy, right? Like I said, we're doing chat telemedicine, but remember, we didn't build all this stuff from scratch. Again, video calls, there are APIs for this stuff, like on Twilio, like it's public, like, somebody who's listening to this call could build a video call app in like, I really do think in 24 hours, very easily. And it would be very, very powerful as well, if they chose the right tools, right? So these, Noteworth, we really focused on not building things from scratch either. So yes, we chose the boring tech, but we also decided to go with, hey, how do you leverage all the APIs that are on the market? So a chat app. We didn't go and build a chat app from scratch using, AWS's, chat infrastructure. I mean, if we were a chat company, then maybe we would do that. But we don't need to do that when we're trying to, again, we were always focused on what is the problem we're trying to solve. And the problem was, how do you get these tools in place? And if there are things that other engineers have already built, let's leverage those, because there are going to be companies out there that are always going to be better with chat than us. And unless we want to be a chat company, let's not do that. But since we've kind of solved for that already, that this strategy, which is if we don't have to build this from scratch, we won't. The challenge we face today is on like 3 fronts. One is definitely BYOD, which is for patients to use any device they want and collect data anywhere that they want. And this is like the dreamland, right? Which is let the user collect data in any way they want and just get that magically over to the clinician and the care team. And we're trying to invest in this pretty heavily and trying to figure out ways to capture this information. Maybe it's integrating with the health kits of the world and automating things for users so that they can get their data in faster, or building pipes into these third-party APIs in a faster way, because that's a significant gap in the market. Because again, there are very few companies that are able to do it successfully, and at a large enough breadth that's really worked. The other area is certainly integrating with existing health systems, which is how do you make sure that all this stuff that is being done in Noteworth is getting into the EMRs and other areas that these health systems have invested in. Because a CTO of another company who's been in healthcare way longer than I have told me, hey, you have to think of healthcare like a pearl necklace. Your system has to talk to many other systems. Like the data you're collecting about medication might need to get into the pharmacy system, right? For the pharmacist to use. And again, if your system can't get this data outside in various different forms, because again, you could just think from a technical standpoint, why don't you just build a REST API for it and make it available? Well, that's not how healthcare works today. There are like 7-8 standards people use today, from like HL7 to like REST to FHIR, and everybody's moving towards the standard called FHIR, but that transition isn't fully there yet. So until that gets there, companies like us, we're always going to face a challenge where we're doing all these cool, innovative things, but how do you make sure this data gets in these other areas? And again, they aren't following like REST format that we're all used to. That makes it a little bit harder. And the last one is reporting. We're doing a lot of interesting work, but how do you gain insights from what is happening within Noteworth and make it more intelligent? If you launch Noteworth and you're managing both your patient populations, how do you make sure you report on that population in a way that lets the health system get insights so they can tweak the program more? And how do you make sure you also get reporting on individual patients out in a powerful enough way that you can also personalize care more? Because you don't want to have one-off care models, but you ideally want to have a model that serves 99% of your use cases, right? So like if you were just thinking of an intelligent machine, you want a model that works 99% of the time, and then you tweak it just a few times. You don't want unique cases all the time. But again, getting to that model is difficult, and I don't think we're in a world yet where people can trust AI to that level. But I think with something like Noteworth and us having all this data we're collecting, plus data that lives in all these other systems, if we can combine it and really focus in on small enough conditions and then expand, the areas of that we're trying to improve reporting and analysis on, I think we could have a significant impact there as well. But it's a big challenge.
Yeah, it certainly is. But it's headed in that trajectory. It's like there's, I guess, taking the first principles approach, technology provides insight that humans can't see. You're right. There's patterns and trends. There's insight in data collected from hardware devices that there's like a gap. It's like humans can provide value if there's no data, no devices, and then there's a gap between what you could gain as insight. And I love the idea of using hardware devices. I would think one of the biggest applications for hardware devices in healthcare is preventative. So seeing when there's a certain trend, throwing an alert like, hey, this is, your my wife is a doctor and I still barely scratch the surface on my medical knowledge, but a trend is going in the wrong direction. And then you throw an alert and say, hey, call this specialist and see if you can figure out what the root of it is. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I don't think you can see the bookshelf on the camera, but the bookshelf just has all these like healthcare books that my fiance is always reading, and it has a whole bunch of things. But one of the interesting parts is something as simple as a patient who has congestive heart failure, just seeing 2 pounds in weight increase is a big deal. Like it can set off. It can be a pretty big indicator in various different areas. And I think again, being able to look at large data sets. So for example, if you were to take all the data that lives in all EMRs out there and look at just patients with congestive heart failure and when they were readmitted into the hospital, because again, seeing a doctor is a different thing than being in a hospital for a day or so because you had an event. That's what you want to avoid. Seeing a doctor to just manage your health better and to increase your life expectancy and things like that, those are great. Like that's ideally how we all want to be using the health system, but that's unfortunately not how it gets used all the time, right? So just that 2 pound increase is a big deal. But seeing what are the other indicators, like if you look at your patient population, was it that and a medication? Was it that and something else that caused all these readmissions? And being able to generalize a model is a challenge, but I think it could have a lot of value because you could help a lot of people who are at rising risk or at risk today, for saving them from life-threatening events for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Health is so interesting because there's different groups of people that technology is better and worse for. I find that there's some group where, picture your average person who exercises, they're aware of their health, they're trying to eat well, trying to live a good life. And then there's some intervention that happens, they get notified, hey, you have, a skin issue. We have to get a biopsy to make sure you don't have cancer. And then we introduce some medical intervention, take it off. And then great, it helps, right? Like that's in my view, that's the best categorical intervention of healthcare. Then there's the person who really is living an unhealthy life. They're aware they're living an unhealthy life, but they're either unmotivated, or even if they want to change, they don't have the psychological or even material capability to change. And that is that's like a frivolous area for players in the space, because it's like no matter what data you present them with, they're not going to change. And also I find interesting in healthcare that there's a conflict. There's a conflict of interest on one level between the people who receive funding for care and the people who provide care. So I one of my biggest gripes with healthcare, and I wish whoever this gets out to, is I feel in the US in particular, we're orders of magnitude higher than other countries on a per capita GDP. So the healthcare cost per capita. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think that is because we have tied healthcare, who pays for healthcare expenses, to our boss, our employer. And if you take a first principles analysis of this, you wouldn't do that if someone said, hey, your auto insurance for your car has to go through your employer. You say, why would that make sense? But because it's been around for 80 years, we don't question it. And I think that's like, I view it as like it's like you have a bike. This is like it's like a stick in the wheel. It's like a stick in the spokes. And like it just takes up a ton of energy. And if you removed employers, and I'm pretty optimistic that once people see it, then it'll catch on like wildfire, because it's bipartisan. It would be bipartisan support. It's like we have effectively a leech on the system, which is the health insurance companies, who charge the employer. They charge your boss, the companies, your employers. They charge them a fee to manage the health insurance. And so in this country, in the US, the incentives for the healthcare providers are to charge more, like every other industry, but the people who pay for it are also to charge more. So the people who pay for health insurance, the health payers, the insurance companies, typically a health insurance company doesn't want to pay money. But when a health insurance company makes revenue, when their income comes from a percentage of the healthcare expenses under as one of their members gets, like if you broke your leg and had to go to the hospital, if the health insurance company made money off that, it would flip the whole game. And I think that's kind of what we have, is a system that the health insurance companies aren't really insurance companies, they're payers. They just pay as middlemen. So I think my view on it is like, look, it's kind of where the rubber meets the road is where the politics go. And if we're moving towards a world where we say, hey, we want single payer and Medicare for all, sounds great. We're all, I don't know, equal, or everyone is cared for, which is, we want everyone to be cared for, but we also want an efficient system to pay for healthcare expenses. And you want variability in people's ability to buy insurance. You know, so there's always there is today, and I think there should remain, a base level of care, medical emergencies. But say you want to get higher level insurance, you know, say you want, you know, premium insurance in case something, you have a skin issue and you want that to be 100% covered. Like, you should have variability in insurance providers. But I don't think there's no mechanism for incentive there, because people don't pay for their own insurance. You know, their healthcare is covered by their employer. So it has two major detrimental factors. One is people are tied to their company. They're afraid to move jobs or get fired because they're going to lose their health insurance. And the other is there's not room for innovators to come in on the health insurance side, in the employer-based health insurance, and like switch it up, you know, make it competitive and moving. And and I hope this gets out. I mean, I think that, like, where the rubber meets the road on this is like the political action should be, we need to detach employers from health insurance. And really, to be more precise, we should allow there to be no penalty for detaching employers from health insurance, because employers don't want to be paying for health insurance. It's just costly and complicated. They'd rather just pay you, the employee, more money, and then you buy your own health insurance, just like you buy car insurance or any other insurance.
I think that's a great, I think that would be a fantastic world if we were to get to it. But I agree. I mean, like you said, there are two problems to it, right? One is on the patient side, which is, you know, how do you make sure there's an incentive there for the patients? And I think that is an area of focus, right? Which is, you know, one area is the care team, like the doctors and nurses, like building tools for them to be able to do things more efficiently, but also on the patient side, like there's a big patient responsibility aspect of it. Like right now, I know I should be working out, you know, 20 minutes a day at the very least, you know, all these things, you know, sleeping 8 hours a day, all those things. Am I doing those things? Not really. Do I try to do those things? Yes, you know, but if there were better tools available to me, would I be more likely to do them? Probably. But I think that's one part of it, like you said. The other part is, how do you like remove these middlemen from this like whole area? We actually have trouble today. You know, again, can't mention specifics, but you know, when we're trying to bring on team members, a lot of times when people can't jump to different teams because of this reason, like you said, because today a health system is tied, a health insurance provider who only sees a specific number of clinicians in their network is tied to then an employer. And then if I work for that employer and I have a significant life event, like I'm having a baby, now I'm tied to the employer and I have no freedom to go anywhere else. And, you know, we actually had a person we were interviewing in our interview process, and we got to the very end and they were like, that became the sticking point. And, you know, so you're right. I mean, this inefficiency has lots of impact on people's ability to move to different companies, and just, you know, be able to even own their data. I think it's ridiculous. My data is trapped in 7-8 different places. And I have to, like, if I wanted to somehow get all this data, I have to like somehow go through multiple different hoops, phone calls, you know, and maybe it's not even there anymore.
You know? I agree. It's really, they have insurance companies by and large have become a leech on the system, where they're just an intermediary to move money from companies to the actual providers like hospitals or doctors.
Well, one of the areas that our product actually gets utilized quite a lot is integrated delivery networks, right? Which is health systems and ACOs, right? Health systems and organizations that are looking not just at the fee for service, but also value-based care, right? And for folks that don't know what fee for service is, it's just you go in kind of like to your doctor, like it's a car shop, right? Like you have a flat tire, you go in, you fix the flat tire, you pay the money, but then there's no long-term, there's nobody looks after that car long-term, like the mechanic, it doesn't care, right? That's fee for service today in the healthcare world, which is hey, you come in, I perform the service, you pay me money, and then you go on your merry way, and we see you in 7-8 months, and hopefully you're not bad again. But we need to go more towards value-based care, where we're actually trying to make sure people are staying healthy. Like, this stuff matters, right? And there are certain actions you can take that could be way worse. Like, okay, you skip a few workouts, maybe not a big deal. But if you start gaining a lot of weight, hey, maybe that requires an intervention, because now you're becoming very risky. And, why let you get, to that stage where, it's going to be a challenge for you as well. And you don't see the consequences, because you also don't want to be on 7 meds, right? Yeah. So that's certainly a part. And health systems and ACOs that are taking more of that approach are definitely the visionaries, right? And and I think they're working really hard to try to get there. And again, the integrated delivery networks, which is a health system that has a payer arm to it. So now think about a hospital where your doctor works. You go to that doctor, but it's not some other insurance company that's paying for your health. It's the insurance company that is part of that health system. So that health system works as a unit, right? So it's the insurance that covers it, plus the doctors that work underneath it, right? And like work alongside them. It's all those forces working with the patient, rather than, hey, that's the insurance company's problem, that's the doctor's problem, that's the patient's problem approach, which has put us in this weird mix where it's all very complicated. Like today, if you were to go to your doctor and try to get a just go for a checkup, you have no idea what you're going to pay. Absolutely no idea. And you know what? Even if you told the doctor, hey, I just have a scratch and I just might need a Band-Aid, can you tell me how much it's going to cost me? They still couldn't tell you, because there are different codes with different insurance companies for different evaluations you do, which makes no sense.
Yeah, I'm very much on the mindset that we need to deshackle the attachments between the people who provide the medical service, like doctors, and the people who pay for them. So, if you buy a car, you can buy any car you want, and then you can go out and get any insurance company you want. And there's a separate relationship there. But if you're like, because then it also, I think it's important for people on a moral sense, because no matter what any human tells you, at the end of the day, there's going to be an influence from what they're financially incentivized to do. So you can have great people that are financially incentivized to do bad things, and that is just going to kind of chip away at their decisions little by little over the years. And I think that comes into play when medical payers in particular are incentivized when you stay in the system. So like, why do we want healthy people? And on some level, that's the only one who really wants to be healthy and really wants to not pay money for healthcare is you. It's you. It's like, of course a doctor wants to see you because they make money. Of course the health insurance company and the hospital and everyone would say, come on in, And so like behind closed doors, whether they know it or not, they're probably going to be like, eat that bag of chips. Like, don't bother exercising. Like no one would ever deliberately say that. And I don't think that people actually want unhealthy people, but we're caught in this like spiral loop where it's like we're all financially incentivized if we eat shitty food and and we're all connected our employers to our health insurance companies. So I just generally hope we can detach that people have more freedom.
I think the freedom of just choice is going to help for sure. I know there's some stuff that people are trying to push with blockchain and making data ownership more transferable, where again, right now, my data lives with all these companies, right? But my healthcare data, why don't I own it? Like it's my data.
Are you bullish on this or bearish? Do you think this is going to come to fruition in our lifetime?
I'm a tech optimist, like
Yeah.
through and through.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's going to come to fruition in our lifetime. I mean, that would be some soothsayer stuff. And I
I
don't
think
know,
so.
right?
I bet it will.
I hope so. I want it to. I really badly want it to, because I think it's crazy how I don't have access, how I can't take my own healthcare
Yeah.
data and give it to my doctor so that he can care for me better, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how does that
Yeah.
make any sense?
I
I mean,
totally agree.
it's totally, nuts.
And how do you, Nishant, how do you describe the vision of the company, like from a perspective to patients, but both people who are interested in working for Noteworth?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest vision for Noteworth, I think, is I don't want. I genuinely believe the care team, like doctors, nurses, the other care team members, like case managers, I really do believe they're in it to help people, and I really do think people do care about their health. I mean, again, you might have the few that people fall off the track. Like when things get stressful at my company, things get a little bit harder, right? Everybody falls off the track. Everybody needs help. I mean, that's why it's we're trying to go more towards value-based care. It's just not a point of care solution, right? But I think ideally we live in a world where none of these technologies and these other people are in the way, and ideally it's just those two things, right? Like building tools that kind of seem like magic to patients and clinicians, and it just lets them do their work. Today, clinicians spend 40% of their time charting. It makes no sense. And like, if all that attention was spent on actually delivering care, that's why these people do it, right? And I think that's what Noteworth's vision is, which is, if we don't even have to have an app on the iPhone and it just kind of work magically, maybe it's some chip that everybody has that just that could just magically do things, or just this AI thing that we all could ideally just get this data magically transferred over,
like a brain implant.
Amazing. I'm fine with it. Like, hey, get these. I know Neuralink is nowhere near kind of that stage yet, and they're just very early on. But yeah, I am very bullish on technology. I think there are still a lot of inefficiencies, and I think if we could remove wasteful work, which is just bureaucracy that we've created from our system to just get just to pay for some of these things, and technology can help alleviate that, I think that would be the vision, right? And again, today we're on the app marketplace. Today we have a clinician-facing app, but tomorrow, if the next big thing was just glasses and somehow or a wearable, like for example, Apple Watches there was an article out where you might be able to take your blood glucose reading without pricking your finger. Again, as technology becomes more seamless, and it's just these things that we could just get this information from and just have access to our own data and own our own data. I think that's the vision, right? Which is ideally we don't have to have an app that the patients have to download, or a thing that the clinicians have to sit in front of, and it just kind of works.
Totally.
That would be awesome. We're not there yet, and quite far from it. But I think the people that are listening to this and hopefully are working on something cool that will help us get there. Just like our team is.
Yeah. Well, I love what you guys are working on. I mean, I've been a supporter, investor for a long time, and wish you guys all the most success. And for people listening, it's a really fascinating technical challenge, because you're dealing with incumbent technology, you're dealing with health, and you're also utilizing new web technology. So it's like old problems and new solutions in healthcare. So yeah, congrats on all the progress, Nishant, and wish you guys the best of luck going forward.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I really appreciate it. That makes sense.
All right. Take care, man.
Take care. Bye.
All right.